Hey guys, Tommy here with TFL Classics, and I've got a really fun video for you today because check it out! This is our latest purchase, a 2001 Audi Tt, and before you go click out of this video forever, hang on for just 1 sec. Because these cars are actually super cool. They're not the boring hairdresser's cars you think they are. The Audi Tt kind of gained a reputation back in the early 2000s as being very expensive for what you got. They weren't all that quick for the price, they didn't handle all that well for the price, and they kind of got a reputation as being more design over function, and a lot of that is true, but some 20 years later, none of that really matters because you can pick up these TTs now for $4,000 or $5,000, and for that amount of money, they're huge amounts of fun. You can pull the roof off in the summer, and they've actually got a ton of absurdly over-engineered and high-quality features. Now, my favorite part about this TT is the interior. This was a pretty rare option, but this is the baseball optic leather interior. It's quite rare in the TT world because it was so expensive, but basically what Audi did is they took this color called amber red and they wrapped it like a baseball glove. So you've got these really big stitches along the edge, and it's a super unique trait of this vehicle that I don't really think any other car actually incorporates. I love this interior. One of the best parts of the car, not all that durable either. You see a lot of these with torn bolsters, but definitely cool, and it's definitely going to be desirable one day. But there's a lot of other cool stuff, and we're going to start with the design. Probably one of the coolest parts of the TT is just the overall exterior design. It's incredibly unique, and I think it's aged really well, especially in this dark gray. This was called Nimbus Gray. It really is like a Nardo gray, but overall the design is very sleek and very elegant. In fact, Audi designed this car with a principle in mind called Bauhaus, which is a German modern art philosophy. Bauhaus was an art school founded in Germany in the early 20th century, and basically it's an architectural principle with long continuous shapes, kind of blocky modern art principles, and that continues throughout the entire vehicle. I love the overall just cohesiveness of the design. Super unique, and like I said, this car is now 19 years old. A lot of people think it's a lot newer than that. The first generation TT is not exactly remembered for its all-out performance, but believe it or not, these cars actually are probably quicker than you might remember. Now, there were two engine options available here in the United States in 2001. They were both 1.8 liter turbocharged units, the difference being the power output. The base engine had 180 horsepower. This is the upgraded unit with 225 horsepower. Now, the great thing about the TT in general is it's based on the Mark IV Golf, which probably sounds kind of underwhelming until you remember that these cars are now 19 years old and they built hundreds of thousands of Mark IV Golfs. So engine parts and kind of just parts in general for the TT are super easy to get, and it also means they're surprisingly reliable because this 1.8 is basically the same engine you'd find in like a Golf GTI. Now, 225 horsepower means that this thing scoots. Audi says 0 to 60 in about 6.7 seconds, which is pretty respectable. And it does have a nice little turbo whistle, especially when you get into the 3,000 or 4,000 RPM range. It is super fun to drive, and it's by no means slow. A quick way to tell whether or not you're looking at the lower horsepower TT is by the exhaust. The 180 horsepower cars had a single outlet exhaust. The 225 horsepower cars had these dual outlet exhausts. And one of the cool things on the rear of the TT is the spoiler, which is actually extremely functional. You see, the early TTs, I'm talking like 98, 99, had a big issue in Germany, especially on the Autobahn, where over 112 miles an hour, the rear of the car started to get light, and several crashes resulted due to the lack of downforce at the back. So Audi did a big recall, and they fitted these spoilers to all following TTs. It's actually kind of a nice design, breaks up the roundness in the rear, but the true TT purists really love the early cars without the spoilers. So maybe those will be the ones that'll be crazy collectible one day, I don't know. One of the coolest exterior design elements of the TT is the fuel filler cap, which is real aluminum, it's not some plastic thing, and it's also surrounded by these hex bolts. But the actual design of this flap, the center portion with the hex bolts, is continued throughout the entire interior. Let's take a look. It's here on the shifter. It's up here on the vents. It's here on the steering wheel. It's even around the door handles. It's just very cohesive, and Audi spent so much money on materials and design. There's pretty much nothing in this TT that is shared with other Volkswagen or Audi products. It's all bespoke to this vehicle. And actually, I was talking to someone at Audi and they said they simply could not do this level of design and materials in the modern cars because there would just be no money in it. Now on the road, this car is really fun to drive. It's not quite as dynamic as like a Porsche Boxster, and it certainly isn't as fun to drive as modern sports cars like a Supra, but it doesn't drive like a cement mixer. When you throw it into a turn, it definitely sticks. There's not a lot of body roll. The suspension is very well sorted, so it's not exactly hard, but it certainly isn't wallowy. I mean, it's not the best car to take out into the canyons and enjoy on a twisty road, but it certainly isn't bad to drive at all. Speaking of the excessive use of aluminum where they probably could have gotten away with plastic, the most obvious portion is here in the center of the vehicle. You've got this big aluminum panel with TT ingrained here in the middle, and this panel actually hides the radio. I don't know why the radio needs to be hidden away from view, but it's kind of cool, and I wish that every car would hide the radio now. There are other examples of excessive hideaway or over-engineered design elements on the interior. Take, for example, the actual vents. Now, the vents look pretty standard. You can move them up and down, but to close or open the vents, you actually twist the entire bezel. It's really high quality, and I like this. Check this out. Although the dimples may seem the same, there's actually a top-mounted dimple, and this little one has got a little kind of extrusion that tells you what position the vents are in. But there's more examples of excessive over-engineering. Take, for example, the heated seat controls. Now, the heated seat controls actually pop out from the center of the dashboard, and then you turn them, and these little LEDs start to illuminate as you increase or decrease the temperature. It's interesting because the exterior of the knob turns, but the interior, where you've got the seat icon, that remains stationary. Someone spent a lot of time designing that. The next example of extreme over-engineering is the climate control. And first off, how do I turn it on? Because there's no on button. Well, they've incorporated the on function into the temperature control. So I push in like that on the actual temperature adjuster, and now you can see I have full control of the climate system. Now there are two primary ways to adjust the temperature. Here on the left, I crank up or down to increase or decrease the heat, but this is not a rotary dial, it's just a switch. Same thing on the fan side. And then I can use these buttons for auto. I can use these buttons to direct air to either the vents, the defrost, or your feet. And then of course I have econ settings for the AC, and then recirc as well. And speaking of the climate control, take a look at these weird looking little tubes. This is the Windshield Defrost, and I've never seen so much design put into a defroster. In fact, these tubes are supposed to make it look like they extend all the way out here to the climate vents. They're right in line with the climate vents, but that's where the air comes out to warm up the windshield. Typically, it's just some crummy plastic vent down here on the cowl, but not on the TT. All right, next up on things that don't need to hide away, but totally hide away, we have the ashtray and the cigarette lighter. Those both come down from this excessively hinged panel from the bottom of the actual dashboard. And then we've got this cubby here, which, believe it or not, is an extremely important cubby because it hides the buttons for not only the fuel filler, but the trunk release. And it slides forward, because they could have just put these buttons on a panel in the dashboard, but no, they wanted to hide them away so you'd never have to look at them. Next up on this episode of I'm an Audi designer and have to design everything, we have the cup holders, which have these aluminum trim rings that hold your drinks in. We also have got these little flexy rubbery things that prevent your drinks from falling over. They're not exactly in a bad place. They're not as bad as something like the new Miata where you're always hitting them when you shift, but I mean, they're a little hard to get to. We also have a cubby in the TT right here in between the seats. Push it open, and you've got this oh, it's falling apart. Shoot. You've got this surprisingly deep cubby that extends both left and right. Nice little storage nook for when you're holding your valuables. I really like the pedals in the TT. They are, of course, aluminum with little rubber fixtures, but they are perfectly arranged for heel and toe shifting. They also have a nice weight to them, and they feel like they're never going to break. One of the big benefits of the first generation Audi TT is that they were available in all-wheel drive. One of the few convertibles back then that you could get in all-wheel drive, and that means that here in Colorado, You can drive this thing year-round, and that's hard to say about like a Z3 or a Z4 BMW or even a Porsche Boxster. Now, it's not exactly a sophisticated all-wheel drive system. It's a first-generation Halidex, which means it's front-wheel drive until the front wheels slip and then will force power to the back, but it is still a heck of a lot better, at least going to the ski resorts, than rear-wheel drive. Now, I have the brochure for this car, and back in 2001, believe it or not, Coupe or Roadster, the only transmission available was a manual. Now, the smaller engine had a 5-speed, the bigger engine had a 6-speed. The smaller engine was also available in front-wheel drive if you so desired, but with all-wheel drive and the 6-speed, it really is kind of a unique driving experience in 2020 because not a lot of other cars now are available with the good old-fashioned manual. One of the first things you notice when you get behind the wheel of the TT is just how large the steering wheel is in relation to the rest of the vehicle. It's super oversized, and it's also very basic. They didn't incorporate steering wheel controls on here, nothing to distract the driver. This one, of course, is also wrapped in amber red leather, and the gauges are also great. Super crisp, super clear, and of course they have to have a round aluminum bezel with little dots around the side. And not even the window switches can be normal in the TT. They had to build their own window switches just for this car. They're these little plastic things incorporated into this aluminum shroud. You pull up to put the windows up, push down to push the windows down, but they're very hidden from view. It's like the Audi engineers, they never want you to see how anything works. You have to like search for it. It's all very cool though. This TT is pretty much fully loaded, so it has a 225 watt Bose stereo, which was a lot back in '01 and is pretty much nothing by today's standards. But the radio that controls that is here. It's super easy to use. You've got 6 preset controls, and to turn the radio on, of course, you have a hidden button. Push that button in, and now that button becomes your volume control as well. So everything has to hide away, of course, and then you've got your cassette player because it was '01, and you know, your standard radio controls. The TT is actually a pretty decent sized trunk. I pushed the button on the interior already, so now I can just pop it open. It's full of stuff right now. I've got to kind of organize all the paperwork and stuff because we have a ton that goes with this car, but even included is the original TT car cover. How cool is that? Very usable trunk, and the great thing is top, up, or down, trunk space doesn't change whatsoever. If you do want more practicality, there is a TT Coupe that was also available, but you got to go for the Roadster. The TT also has a wind deflector. It's a glass wind deflector, but I don't have to get out and put some silly thing into the rear of the vehicle. I pull a button on the interior, and then it rises up from the rear. How cool is that? I love that feature, and it means that on the highway, almost no wind buffeting or noise whatsoever. Putting the top up and down in the TT is very easy. There's just one button on the interior of the vehicle, but this one has its tonneau cover installed right now, which just kind of cleans up the look. You really don't need it when you drive down the road, but I think it looks kind of cool. So you got to pull off the tonneau cover. You do that by pushing in a button like that. And you can drive around like this all day long. You're not going to hurt the car. I'm a little OCD, so I like to have the top mechanism all covered up. But take a look at how the top goes up and down. Alright, I left you in suspense for long enough. How much did we pay for this first generation TT? Well, this one has 140,000 miles. It has the single best service history I've seen on any car ever. It's a 2-owner car, and we paid $6,000 for it. And that's a lot as TTs go. Typically you can find a good one of these for $4,000 or $5,000, and they are a heck of a lot of car for not a lot of money. Pretty simple to fix because underneath these are basically just a Golf GTI with all-wheel drive here in the United States. And they're great cars. I really have been loving driving around in this TT. It's got a really bad reputation as being, you know, a hairstylist car, but who cares? It looks brilliant, it's comfortable, it's got a crazy amount of weird features in it, and it makes you feel special as you drive along. And for $5,000 or $6,000, you just can't go wrong, especially in Nimbus Gray with the baseball stitching. This is super cool. Well, as always, this has been Tommy with the Fast Lane Classics. Check out TFL Car and TFLtruck.com for the latest and greatest in new and, of course, used budget car reviews.